When 3D modeling complex forms, you'll often want to select a specific piece of geometry for modification while leaving the rest of your design untouched. This can get pretty hairy once you've got a complex design, but for now I'll demonstrate using some simple geometry. So first things first, I'm going to select this object and delete it. And then I'll be using the wireframe and solids tabs in order to give us some material to play with. So let's say we can make some points, for example. And I'll just click these at no particular spot. I can also click on the circle icon to make myself some two-dimensional forms. I'll also click on the Solids tab, and if I select Cylinder, for example, I'll need to click on the center point of the base, pick an initial geometry, and then in order to make the height, I'll right-click the mouse while I'm in the middle of the command, switch to the isometric view, use the scroll wheel to back out, and then left-click once I've got a height on that object. So clearly not a beautiful design, but the idea here is that we have a number of different types of entities to select from. If I head over to the right-hand side of the screen, I'll see an area known as Quick Masks. And then I can hover on each of these elements and you'll see that each circle has two different options for selection. On the left-hand side, I can select all point entities, for example. So that will automatically pick just the points and nothing else. On the right-hand side, I can say select only point entities. Now this won't select things for me automatically. I'll show you what it does, but first I'll hit Escape in order to have nothing selected. Now if I drag a box over all of my geometry, the only thing the selection will listen to will be the point entities. And you'll notice as I select different options, some of them become grayed out because they're no longer applicable to the material I'm looking for. Sometimes once you've set up a rather complicated selection scheme, you might also choose to come here to the last icon and say Clear Selection to get us back to normal. In addition to the quick masks on the right, you'll also be commonly using this bar at the top of the graphical view called the Selection bar. It's usually grayed out until your mouse hovers over the top. And this gives us a parallel set of selection options as well. So for example, here I can say Select Last. And if I have multiple selections set up in my history, I can work back through those. I can also choose for the selection box to operate differently. So for example, by default, we usually want to select things that are inside the box. And I'll need to clear these options to make this completely apparent. Here, for example, I only select geometry that falls entirely with the box, and that's why the cylinder is not selected. However, I can also say that if something falls partially within the box, I should add it to the selection, like so. By default, you're usually going to keep this thing right here at In. I can also decide for the selection method, do I want, for example, an automatic selection, which usually comes in the form of a box. I'll hit Escape to deselect. Or, for example, do I want something a little more complex, like a polygonal selection area? So here I might be able to draw in a more complex fashion to reach an area that my box could not reach. Over here on the left-hand side, there's also an interesting set of options known as the auto cursor. These won't necessarily be available until you start creating geometry. So I'll switch to the wireframe tab. This might also be easier to do in the top view. So let's say I'm starting a circle, and I'm cued to enter the center point of the circle. Now auto cursor becomes available, and this gives me all manner of options that help me snap relative to a particular piece of geometry on the stage. So for example, arc centers are easy enough to find, but quadrants are another interesting point when it comes to circles. So if I select quadrant now, I'll automatically be able to pick one of those quarter points around the edge of the circle in order to create new geometry, like so. And that's a quick overview of the selection tools.